Welcome to VADA Live. I'm your host, Dan Kerrigan, and we're bringing you news and insights dealers can use. Well, an often overlooked part of dealership compliance is Deal Jacket Audits. They're important to help ensure dealers meet regulatory requirements, avoid costly fines, and improve overall operations. We're cutting through the complexity to bring practical, actionable insights. And joining us, to break it all down, it's Ann Gambardella, General Counsel and Executive Vice President at VADA, and Brad Miller, who is Chief Regulatory and Compliance Officer and Head of Legal at ComplyAuto. ComplyAuto is a VADA program partner. Let's get started. Well, to kick things off, when you bring up jacket audits with dealers, what's the most common first reaction?
Well, thank you very much. I think the answer is it varies. It varies in some cases widely. I mean, let's level set for just 30 seconds here. Remember, the deal jacket is a commemoration of the vehicle sale and negotiation process, right? And there's a lot of moving parts that go into a car deal. There are a lot of historically varying opinions about what should be in these deals. But at the end of the day, this is your record. This is your memorialization of what happened with that customer, right? It's whether you need it for regulatory compliance, for contractual reasons, for issues with the financing company. This is a critical part of dealership operations. So there's lots of varying sort of opinions about what it should include, how it should be treated. And then auditing it is another question. And I think the answer is the dealers, unfortunately, in some cases, it's only dealers that have had problems that sometimes think about this. Mm-hmm. But really, most dealers, and certainly most forward-thinking dealers, are saying, look, this is where my biggest risks lie. It is critical and central to what I do as a dealer. So I've got to get this right. And I got to know what's going on in the dealership, in the front end, in arguably the most important part of my store. How do I do that? I look at the record. So I think maybe I'm biased. I'm a lawyer, but the smart dealers are saying, yeah, I got to know what's happening, and I need to know what the record is telling me and what's happening in my stores, and they really think about it that way.
And what is the number one thing dealers should know about this? I pose the question to you both from your just respective areas.
And I can jump in. To me, it's you don't have to know the nuances of state and federal law. You should have experts on your staff who do, but you need to know that this is a critical piece of what you do. It is probably your biggest regulatory and legal exposure at the dealership because it is a record, right? And you have to keep it. And really digging into those, at least on an audited basis, on a sampled basis, is critical to understanding what's happening in your stores.
Well, and I think the dealers are spending a lot of time and resources on a lot of these compliance programs, be it, their fair credit programs, their sale of protection products, all those sorts of things. How do you know if your program is working unless you're checking to make sure that it's operating the way that you've trained your folks to do it? That whole, inspect what you expect mantra, and without going into the deal jackets, you're not going to know that things are being handled the way that you'd like them to be. So that's a very important part of your whole overall compliance program.
Yeah, look, it's an audit, right? People are smart enough to know you don't just, your books are what they are, but you audit your books. There's a reason for that, right? Your financial records. You do the same with your deal jackets, and there's a reason for that. It's important. It's important to get right, not just from a compliance perspective, but frankly from a process and from the value of your dealership perspective as well.
What are some of those most common mistakes that dealerships make in this area?
Oh boy, it varies. I think it's funny because it can go two ways. I think broadly speaking, one is that the first mistake is they don't know what's happening. They don't have a process. They don't have a good checklist. They aren't following the checklist. They aren't taking steps to make sure it's there. But I think I'd broadly even go the other way, is kind of not thinking about the implications of what's in there, right? I'll give you a good example. And there are sort of two ways of thinking about this. Do you keep worksheets? Do you keep negotiation documents in the deal jacket, right? I can't give legal advice, but there are two ways of thinking about this. In some ways, I think it's a risk because people write random things on these documents, and it can. And I can tell you as a lawyer, you don't want a document that you don't know what it says on a legally important issue, and creating a record that you don't intend, right? On the other hand, do you want to be able to prove your good practices? And there's arguably, we can talk about in a minute, there have been some enforcement actions to suggest you need to keep these things. So a mistake is not thinking it through and having a process about what's being kept in there, even before you think about auditing it. This is an important legal document. You got to understand what's in there and make sure what's in there is right.
And Ann, just from the Virginia legal perspective, are there any kind of state regs, anything dealers should be aware of in the state?
There is a state code section in Virginia that deals with dealer records and the things that you have to keep. You've got to maintain them for 5 years. There's a broad ability to maintain things electronically. Two things that I would point out is it requires you to keep dealer records. It doesn't necessarily say you have to keep them in a deal jacket. And where that comes up for our dealers most recently is now state inspections are automated. There's a process with state police. So as long as there's somebody in the dealership, should the dealer board investigators come in, that can access that state police database, you don't necessarily have to print off a piece of paper and stick it in a folder per se, or as you get electronic records, somehow append that safety inspection piece to your electronic records. And then the other thing is to keep your records electronically, you do have to get a variance from the dealer board. They routinely grant them, but just understand that if you want to go down that route, or if you are already down that route and haven't done that, just make sure you contacted the dealer board and ask for that permission. It's not a problem. It's just something it's just a step you got to take. So those are sort of the two things we see. And the other stuff in the dealer record statute, it's sort of like our buyer's order statute. What you have to keep in the dealer record statute is a minute piece of what should be in a good compliant deal jacket that will protect the dealership and make sure that the processes the dealer has put in place are being used properly. So it's really sort of the absolute floor. And a lot of what Brad and ComplyAuto do is, make sure that you're using that Deal Jacket audit tool to make sure you're doing all the other stuff right that is so important with regulatory compliance these days.
That's a great point. Let me just jump in on the federal side. I'll tell you, people tend to forget, and it's 25 months, generally speaking, under federal law. It sounds like there's a longer period of time under Virginia state law, so keep that in mind. You want to keep it the longer, not the shorter. But that also applies to dead deals, to sort of non-consummated transactions. I don't know how it works on the Virginia statute. I think it's the same way, but just something that dealers sometimes forget. You have to keep not just the ones you sold, but the ones that didn't make it all the way through the process.
And we're hearing more about increased regulatory scrutiny on dealerships. Any insight to what's driving this, and why should dealers be paying attention to this now?
Yeah, look, I'll jump in. I spent 17 years at NADA following the regulatory environment for dealers, and I think the last 18 months has frankly been some of the most active I've ever seen at the state and federal level. Now, I know we've had a change of administration, and hopefully we're in a little bit more of a deregulatory environment, but the regulatory environment is not always connected to the enforcement environment either, right? And so we have not seen any indications that this is going to slow down. And I'll tell you, the two areas, and there's lots of enforcement against dealers, like I said, at the state and federal level, but the two areas really advertising and F&I practices. And F&I practices is where you get into the deal jacket. That's the record of what you're doing with products, with what you're doing with disclosures, not just the required notices and other things under federal and state law, but it's become a real hot button area. In fact, for the first time I have ever seen in 17 years, an FTC enforcement action, recent FTC enforcement action, specifically mentioned deal jacket audits in the claim against the dealer, right? And it's the first time I've ever seen them talk about the fact they sort of implied that it was one of the standard things that dealers should be doing as part of their compliance oversight. And it's the first time I've seen it. I'm not surprised, but it is, I think, a bit of a sea change from the federal perspective.
Yeah, and I would just note that, in an enforcement action, too, there was a little bit of back and forth with one of the NADA policies, and it wasn't enough just to say you adopted the policy. It was that you had to be monitoring the implementation and the continued use of that policy throughout the store, and that's where the deal jackets come in. I mean, it is it's gotten to the point now where it is at least a full-time job for somebody in the dealership. But that's why a partner like ComplyAuto is so important. They do such a great job in helping dealers sort of corral these things. And to put a optimistic spin on it, I always tell dealers these are sort of the 8-day-a-week, 25-hour-a-day things. Every dealer would be doing them if you had 8 days a week and 25 hours a day, because they make a lot of sense. They protect the dealership. They protect the dealer's data. They protect the value of their business that they've built up. So all of these things are very important, but they're also just very time consuming and hard to get your arms around. So we, encourage dealers highly to seek out, partners like ComplyAuto that can really help with all of these areas. Deal Jacket Audit is just sort of the cherry on top to say, we've done all these other things and put all these other things in place. Are they working? Are we doing them properly? And again, checking behind what you've trained people to do is critically important.
I'll just add, again, my lawyer hat for a minute. I always tell people having a policy is great, but it's almost worse to have a policy that you don't follow than to not have one at all, right?
And so, you've admitted that you're supposed to be doing something.
Right.
You can't claim your ignorance anymore.
Right. You put it in writing and said, I do this. And then if you don't, you just created a problem for yourself. So again, and the problem is, of course, you're required to have all sorts of policies for all sorts of reasons from your lender, from your OEM, from the state, from the feds. So you've got this dealers are in a tough spot because they're required to do all these things. And then how do you know as a GM or a dealer principal or as even an F&I or sales manager what the heck is actually happening? Are they following it, right? And so that's where the audits come in. That's where getting somebody who knows this stuff, who lives and breathes this, this nuances of these, some of these, arcane regulations at the federal and state level. And frankly, I will add to Ann's point, what makes me excited more than anything else is being able to leverage the latest technology to do this, right? Deal jackets, I've seen 200-page deal jackets, right? These are not small legal documents, and all the details on these documents matter. Getting a human being to actually, with any accuracy, to go through and look at that is a challenge. Even a trained lawyer, even a trained dealership person, right? Leveraging things like artificial intelligence, which we do, it is amazing. I mean, I know it's a buzzword these days, but that's exactly the kind of thing that technology is for, to take large volumes of data, to do it accurately, to summarize it. But the key is you can't just do that. You have to have someone who also knows the nuances of the law, understands how dealerships work. And, again, someone like ComplyAuto, Virginia dealers are so lucky to have resources like VADA and Ann and her team. Not all dealers have that, and they are super helpful. But to actually dig into those 50 to 200-page documents every day routinely and get it right is tough. And so I encourage you to think about ways to leverage technology to help you.
What are maybe 3 things or takeaways dealers should know about Deal Jacket Audits and essentially protecting their business in many ways is the goal here?
Yeah, and look, let me give you one specific example that I think brings this home. We've sort of alluded to this before, but these enforcement actions, at the end of the day, that we've seen, what the regulators don't like, and they continue not to like for a reason, are, I'll broadly say, things that are failure to properly disclose, mainly add-ons, voluntary protection products. Payment packing, right, for lack of a better term. And that is can be a nuanced, difficult thing to detect, right? And so you need someone who is steeped in this, or again, technology that is good enough to detect it. And so again, there's lots of moving pieces. You want to make sure the red flags report. You want to make sure the OFAC's done. You want to make sure that the proper risk-based pricing notice, exception notice is in the. All those things are obvious in the audit, but you need somebody who has a much deeper level of experience to really tell you where the risks are for more I would just say sophisticated issues like payment packing or power booking or things like that historically have happened and does happen occasionally, unfortunately, in dealerships. And just the regulatory environment in Virginia, any recent upcoming changes, almost kind of looking into the future for a dealer might want to get ahead of everything. Any advice or words for them on how to handle this?
We're certainly seeing not quite as much activity in Virginia as perhaps other states. We did have a, quote, junk fee bill passed this year that was passed after some discussion last year that ended up with a carve out for us. As long as dealers are complying with state law requirements for disclosing fees, like processing fee and freight charges, for instance, that our state law handles with a specific regulatory framework. But it doesn't just exempt dealers. So it could be a problem for dealers who want to add additional fees. If you're adding the fees that the dealer board says you can't, reconditioning fees, transfer fees, all sorts of other things that dealers can get very creative on. There's going to be, potential exposure under our Consumer Protection Act for those advertising violations going forward. If you're not properly disclosing prices. So, and that's not unusual. That's going to happen across the board in, I think, most states, particularly if the federal government, takes a less hands-on approach to some of these regulatory matters. You're going to see states stepping up. And, the Virginia political environment is such, we've got elections this year. It is it's better than even money, as they say, that we'll have a state government that's fully controlled by Democrats come 2026, and that could lead to additional consumer protection activity. So it's certainly something for dealers to keep their eye on. One more reason in a long litany of reasons to get yourself buttoned up and really pay attention to these things.
Yeah, and I just one more thought that, again, for the dealers who are thinking about this, just like many other things, just looking at this is not enough, right? You have to sort of take steps to remediate, right? We always say this, and actually in the ComplyAuto's, we have a new product called Guardian that does Deal Jacket Audits utilizing AI. We still have human beings that will go through the process with you. But one of the most powerful things we've seen, and the dealers really like, is the ability to go in and then identify who was involved in the issue, in the deals at hand, and assign some remediation training. Look, you may not have. Why was this document missing? Why was this form not filled out properly? Why was the fair lending form, the NADA for lending form, why was it not filled out properly or signed or whatever the case may be? Okay, you've identified it. That's great. But then what are you doing to make sure you fixed it? So there's it's just like anything else. You got to understand why this is an issue. You then have to do the audits to make sure you see what's happening, and then take steps to fix it. Right? That's the three legs of the stool. The process, and you can't forget any of them.
Where should dealers start? Those that are interested to see the value, perhaps it has been a minute, or there may be some gaps within both, the process and identifying things for someone to say, okay, I'm all in on this now. Let's get moving. This seems really daunting. Where's that starting point for them?
They need to call ComplyAuto's what they need to do.
Absolutely. We help lots of dealers. We have 10,000 dealers around the country. We know what we're doing. Look. I want you to come to our company, but get with somebody if you're not with us. But, we've got the best tools in the industry. We are able to scale this. We're able to get you information about what's happening, and we can sort of work with you on the best way to process this. But yeah, look, the idea is you got to get started. Just get started, right? And again, it's an audit. It's not saying that you're looking at every single one. You're going to see patterns developing over time. You're going to get some learning and knowledge about this. You don't want a surface review, though. I would say it's just something that's very thorough, like the ComplyAuto Guardian system, and yeah, we're here to help. And this is an area I think that dealers consistently have been surprised that it drives not just compliance issues but process issues, and sort of helps efficiency of the store when they really get this right.
Within dealerships, just to put a really fine point on it, how big of a priority is this really?
I mean, it's only a priority insofar as the dealer management makes it a priority. It's not something that salespeople and F&I folks are going to do. I mean, that's just not their world. Their world is sell cars, and that's what they want to do. But they have to do it within the framework of state and federal law, and then also the culture and the priorities of the dealer management. Without knowing that they're following the training that you've put in place, you're sort of flying blind and putting a lot of trust in your staff that's turning over a lot. I mean, Brad's point is well taken. Why did this happen? Well, maybe they weren't trained properly because they came in between, training classes, or the person training them wasn't, didn't get all the training they needed, or had fallen out of practice on some of these things. So it's a constant need to keep up with these things. And as we look at regulatory compliance, the idea that you put up your hand and say, hey, I get that I can't do all this anymore. I've brought in the experts. That goes a long way to showing that you care about a culture of compliance in your dealership.
All great points, Ann. And look, it's funny. We've seen in our processes, people will really focus on this, right? And they'll see some nice trends going down, and then people turn over and it goes up again. So it's not a one and done process. It's sort of a constant battle because there are new folks at the dealership. Every day there's new challenges. There's some new rules and things that change. And you're dealing with human beings. I mean, it is a hard world when you're dealing with human beings, both internally as employees and as customers. And so, getting some control over that and getting some insight, again, the folks that we see, it's not just that it comes from the top, but the fact that they, this helpless feeling the dealers sometimes have. They're like, I'm trying to do the right thing, but I have no idea what's going on, right? So overcoming that, I think, is the first step in realizing there's some tools out there for you.
And as maybe one final question for you both, we have talked about mistakes that you commonly see. What do you think are the differentiators for those who are successful with this? And seeing that there's two parallels here, the regulatory part of this, but hearing both of you loud and clear, there's a process element to this too, and benefit with that. What do you think separates those that are really strong in this area?
Look, consistency, right? I mean, that's ultimately it, right? It's dealers deal with very complicated transactions with a lot of moving parts and a lot of people, right? And so, you think about how a bank or financial institutions handle these things. They don't do it for a little while and say, oh, the problem solved, and then go away, right? They make it a priority. They find the most efficient way to address it, to remediate it, and then they make it part of the process and they keep it consistent. That's the difference, right? And so it's dealers spend a lot of time making sure their process is right, but then not enough making sure that it's being followed. So those are the folks that I think really find success.
And again, I think that consistency can lead to, I think there's a misnomer that all of this just slows down business and keeps down profits and all that. It can be just the opposite. I mean, a good selling process and good training can lead to better penetration in some of these, product areas. And so, a rising tide can lift all boats. And so, definitely coming at it from that perspective. And that's why I think it's important to have people that you're working with that understand the business and understand that side of things, because that's where you're really going to get the buy-in, is when, your sales and F&I staff go, hey, this menu presentation really works. It helps me explain this to the customers better, and they get the products that they need, and the sale process is streamlined for me. So I think there's a benefit to it that is often overlooked. So making sure to emphasize that benefit part of the equation, and not just the, oh God, we got to do all these forms. The
lawyers are coming in again and bothering us. Yeah,
damn
exactly.
Lawyers.
Come on, exactly.
So.
Well, thank you both. That is our wrap for this edition of VADA Live. Again, thank you, Ann and Brad, for sharing your insights. We are talking Deal Jacket Audits and compliance best practices. Brad is with ComplyAuto. If you're interested in learning more about ComplyAuto, which is a VADA partner program, you can find more on VADA's website. Thank you for watching VADA Live. I'm Dan Kerrigan. See you next time.